Hey, hello everyone. So how is the sound? Just checking my sound here. Very good. Okay, so I'll start. So this is a game of Huang Longxi. Sorry about that. Huang Longshi. That's as close as I can get to the pronunciation of his name. And he was a great player in ancient China. So it's the country name, of course, is was different back then, but it's the Chinese continent at least. And it was a period of peace in China, relative peace, and so the culture was developed, and they had a lot of strong players. So Huang Longshi he was a player who was a child prodigy, and it's said that at the age of 18 he defeated all of the established stronger players. He played a series of games against the most distinguished player of the time, and it was a 7 game series, and he won all 7. So at the age of 18, he sort of dominated the Go scene there. And he was born, let's see, I got 2 dates. It was somewhere in the 1650s. So it was 1651 or 1654, one of those 2 dates. And he lived to 40 or 50 years of age, so to the end of the century. This was the same period of time was the Edo era in Japan, and they had they were beginning the golden age of Go in Japan with players such as Hoinbo Dosaku, for instance, who was about the same. He was pretty contemporary, I think. But of course, in those days, traveling between Japan and China was still a bit of an adventure, and I think Japan was more or less a closed country at the time, so they didn't have people um, playing international games like they do nowadays. It's a pity, sort of, because it would have been interesting to see them play. And you can see something already a bit unusual about the board position here. One of the reasons that I think that these ancient Chinese games are sort of not so well known as the ancient Japanese games is because they had a system in opening that is um, different. They didn't have the parallel openings because they started, just to go back a few moves, they started with 2 stones each placed on the corners like this. And so they had these diagonal openings. Where, for instance, if we look at the popular openings in the 20th century, everyone wanted to play parallel openings. So they would play, for instance, so like we would have actually, another thing that's interesting about this is that white plays the first move. So I have white playing first. But for instance, like you would have black playing here to head for the Chinese opening, or playing here to head to the Sanrense, the 3 stars in a row. Or there would be this kind of miniature Chinese kind of thing happening. Or the players could have, we could go back and say they could have um, openings that were based on the 3-4 points still. These were the kind of openings that people liked to play in the 20th century. And black was basically using 3 moves on one side of the board to build a position which gave black a local advantage, and was trying to build a moyo or win the fight in the local fight. So that was the kind of thing that was really popular. And here's how the Chinese were playing it. They had started with this as a set position, so it made it kind of less popular for people to study these games. But actually, they're very strong towards the middle game. This kind of starting position, it sort of jump starts the middle game, and so it made the Chinese players very strong fighting players. And it's sort of hard to say whether they were as strong or stronger than the Japanese players because it's just such a different game that they're playing. In general, I'd say abstract games, they do have set positions to start with. Like all of the variants of chess have all the pieces on the board to start with. So you have, I think it's a normal thing for people to have these set positions. And maybe Go is the exception in that we got rid of it. And I believe that the Chinese had some different positions also, which used more stones. but this position with 2 stones each is definitely the mainstream way that the Chinese used to play Go. And we don't really know exactly when the Japanese stopped doing this, because I think that back in the 7th century, somewhere around then was when Go came to Japan, maybe through the Korean Peninsula. It's not really very well documented. They have an anecdote about a Japanese diplomat, or a Buddhist monk actually, but he was acting as a diplomat, and he went to China and learned the game, they say. But other accounts say that he could already play it when he went. So we don't really know exactly when Go came to Japan. I believe that they probably had this system at first, and at some point they stopped playing it. But I don't think it's very well documented. I can't promise you that I'm correct. So to get into the game, Huang Longshi is playing with the black stones. That means that his opponent has the first move, because in these ancient Chinese games, white actually plays the first move. So it's a kind of a handicap, because white is not giving a komi, so white gets the advantage of the first move here. Yes, okay. Yam Jimfang sounds maybe like a Chinese name. Is pointing out that every surviving group, there's something called the cutting tariff, and actually, the more groups you have, cost you 2 points. So the way I imagine it is that when you have a group that's cut off from your other groups, you have to make 2 eyes, and so you imagine that they fill the points in as you do in the Ings Cups rules, and you have to leave room for 2 eyes. And I'll talk about that at the end of the game, because this is a game that's going to be sort of interesting at the end, because I'm going to be giving a different result in points for the Japanese rules and the Chinese rules and the ancient rules, the ancient Chinese rules, you might say. Okay, yes, and I am on Twitch also. For those of you who prefer Twitch, you can watch me on Twitch, but so it's on YouTube and Twitch at the same time. And so when Huang Longshi was 18, he played a series of he played a 7-game series against the most distinguished player, and then he played something like 10-game series against various players. Oh, Marianne Borka, thank you very much for the present. Yeah. And so then one of the few players who could actually challenge him, who was a challenging opponent, was this player with white, Zhou Donghou. I think that's how his name is pronounced. I'm sort of handicapped because with Japanese, they have the same characters but different pronunciations, and I'm sort of accustomed to doing it in the Japanese, which is not really correct from the worldwide viewpoint, I think. So I'm trying to say it in the Chinese pronunciation. I think I'm pretty close. And he was a bit older. I think he was born in the 1640s, so that makes him about a decade older than Huang Longshi. And so he was in his mid-20s when Huang Longshi was 18 and dominating the Go scene. And he was one of the players. He was one of maybe 2 players who challenged Huang Longshi throughout his life. So just to go into it now. This is actually pretty unusual, extending on the side. At that time, they were already playing a lot of approach moves. So probably the most popular move at this point would be some kind of an approach move like this. So it's pretty modern. The same way as we would play it before we started having AIs. Of course, when you have AIs, they all want to jump into the 3-3 point. So an AI would tell you to jump into the 3-3 point. But before we had AlphaGo and the AIs and all that, we would say this is normal. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat. There seems to be a lot of interesting stuff happening here. Right, yeah, it's a lot of the Go history is just so old that we don't have a lot of documentation about what exactly was happening. I think as soon as Go became a thing that they were writing about and making Go records and stuff like that, records of games, I think at that point they were already using these stone placement rules. So as far as I know, it goes pretty far back, as far as we can know. Yes, and there's a group text, which is going to be something I'm going to talk about at the end, and it changes the strategies. It really works well. It's another factor that works well to encourage these players in ancient China to fight a lot, because the player with one group is going to have a great advantage in that. And if we talk about it with the Japanese system, it's a 2-point difference for each group that they make. Okay, so yeah, so white played this move, and this is already an unusual opening. I think he was just trying to. It was kind of you could even call it a kind of a trick move. It's a tricky move at least, and this is a point where black has a choice of defending the corner maybe with, for instance, in the game he played here, which is a very stubborn move. He could have defended the corner with a move like this, or a move like this, which would just leave whatever is going to happen on the side. So, for instance, I would probably, my first instinct, if I saw this without any computer analysis, I would probably assume that this is good. And if white plays something like this is going to be okay. Black's going to play something like this. It's probably good. White, when I asked Kadawa, actually, white's going to play like this and something like this to make a kind of a squeeze. So this might be how white plays, getting a very good position on the outside. So this would be one variation I would be thinking of playing. Otherwise, black could have, let's see, could have avoided that by playing here. And this would be making the covering move at b7, and protecting the corner would be miai. So for instance, if white does something like this, then at some point black's going to play here. And that's going to be a very strong shape towards the left side. And black's going to be playing this point at c14 fairly soon, because white has to continue with this anyway. So white would be playing here maybe. So something along these lines would be maybe better. This was a very stubborn move. And of course, white dives into the 3-3 point. So the 3-3 point was a thing. They realized it was important. I wouldn't say that the Go theory, the opening theory that they had, was bad. It was just that it was based around this one opening where they had the cornerstones in diagonal placement, which made it, and like these local josekis and everything, the opening, the whole board position is relevant to whether they work or not. So they had a whole bunch of josekis, and they had opening theory that was just relevant to this position, and so it wasn't working with those openings that I was talking about that we like to play in the 20th century. It wasn't necessarily working with them. So that's why all these old Chinese josekis sort of died out. But this is actually a very sharp move. It's the move that white was looking to play with b6. And black played here. This was the correct choice. If black had played on the outside, then white would crawl here. And like this. This is just a very good position for white. It's a success. Black's wall, we don't know if it's going to work yet. This would be a kind of a normal position if we got rid of these two stones. And that exchange there of c10 for c8 is obviously a good exchange for white. White's starting to control the upper left part of the board, while black's c8 is pretty useless move. So this would be very good for white. So black is playing on the correct side here. One Dragon is saying, "Go have any changes coming up in the future, or are we playing the version that will always be played?" Well, people do play different. They make different role sets all the time. So my answer to that is I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, who was the player right before Huang Longshi who started to really favor corners? And I covered him in one of my reviews this month. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which. You might be talking about someone else's review. Okay, so yeah, this is an important move also that cuts off the white stone here. there were a lot of famous Chinese players. They were already playing at a fairly high level. And when you get into the fighting here, you can see how this is sort of jump-starting the fighting. White is already sort of trying to attack that black group. And now black is going to build some strength there in the lower left part of the board and is going to counterattack by pinching this stone. So what he did was he played here, pushing a very forceful move. And it was not the way I would play it, was not the advised move. Kata was talking about moves like this and this. This is what I would call the natural looking move. While pinching here would be a much more active and aggressive move. If black plays here and white answers like this, there's no reason really for black to need a stone here. And so this would be the more natural way to do it. And the way they played in the game, it was probably, if you ask a computer, I know that it's not as good. So it's probably something that I would not choose to play anyway. My feeling is that it's not as good, but it's probably a very, very subtle difference. And he's playing according to his style. He's just building a huge wall here. And I would say black is aware that there's a 3-3 invasion in the lower right corner, which is going to reduce the value of white's moyo. And so in that way, it's a very modern strategy of giving white the side and planning to be invading here later. So black can invade here. In some cases, black would invade the 3-4 point, but usually black wants to invade the 3-3 point here. And in a modern game, black would be thinking of doing it fairly soon. But again, these games with the cutting tariff, in which if you get a lot of separate groups, you have to pay 2 points for each group, reduces the value of invading the 3-3 point like this. So it reduces the value. And the players of this time were not so hasty to jump into the 3-3 point. So it makes sense. And black plays here. So this is a good move. It is starting to cut this stone off and use the wall that black has built. And black still has some forcing moves on the 5th, 6th line here. And it's so he can do that. Right. So yes, people are all commenting about this black move here. It looks really stubborn. And I think they're talking about C7 here. So that's Leonardo. Oh, Filippi Fanaro. Thank you very much. That was a nice present. Thank you very much. It really bothers you. Derek Neal is saying that also. And the same traditional start, this number says. Yes. Again, I think it's not as bad as it might seem. And it has to do with the fact also that there is this cutting tariff. There is an advantage to building these single strong groups and keeping your stones connected and cutting off the opponent's stones, which is what black is doing to this white stone here, and creating a position where you can attack. And I see a lot of that in Huang Longshi's games. So he was good at sort of controlling the game. He was said to he liked to play Kikashi and give his opponent over-concentrated shapes sometimes. So that is, in a way, it's similar to what was happening in Japan with players like Hoinbo Dosaku, who in Japan they invented that idea. There wasn't much to and fro from Japan to China, vice versa, because traveling was so different. But the ideas were happening pretty much at the same time here. And so let's go into so white plays here. So this is a really tricky move, and it looks crazy, and in the game it worked really well. So this was amazingly successful, this move, and it and what black did was black played the natural shape move here. It looks so obvious that black should play here. That's the shape that white would usually be trying to avoid by peeping here. So this would be the normal move unless white wants to cut actually. Peeping here seems to be the wrong shape, but in this case it was extremely effective. So this was it was a very tricky move. I wouldn't call it a trick move, it was a tricky move. And it turns out that what black had to do here, this is a very important part of the game, where I had to research it with katago before I really understood, but black had to ignore the cut and get to this point first. So the whole idea was that in the game, let's take a look at the game. Let's take a look at the game. By playing this exchange, now this becomes forcing because cutting at e5 would be devastating. It would be really important. And by playing that exchange, it seems white's being unreasonable at first because white's right up against black's wall. But by playing that exchange, white has created what might be called even a forcing move. This was a semi-forcing move against the two black stones on the left. So white is threatening to pull this white stone out. And if black answers there, so if black answers with something like this, then white's going to have that extra stone at e9 here, this stone here. That was a pretty important stone that white got that will help white wherever white plays in the upper left corner. But white's going to switch back to the upper left corner and is going to have an advantage because of that extra stone at e9. So this was very, very sharp. It was a very clever sequence there. And so black had to avoid that by playing away, sort of, and taking this key point himself, which would change the whole thing. And really, cutting here is not a big issue. Black can just answer on. Sorry. So cutting here, oops. Cutting here is not a big issue because black can answer on this side. It's no big deal. And so black had to take the initiative on the left side. So 3 was a key point that missing this point made it a really difficult game for Huang Longshi. And so he has the black stones, just to remind you. But the fact that he has the black stones means that his opponent played the first move, because in these ancient Chinese games, white is playing the first move. So he has a disadvantage with no komi to start with. Sort of confusing because he has the black stones, but he has a disadvantage with no komi, his opponent playing the first move. And after this, when we get to this position where white is threatening to play at c6 and getting this extra kikashi from outside, this was a very clever maneuver here. This is very well done by white, and it's working very well. Okay. Oh, Guo Biding, I know that one. Yeah, he was a famous Chinese player also. Sorry, I took a bit of time to see that. Okay, so black played away. And this is where it gets really crazy, the fighting. And this is just sort of very typical of the games they played this time. It was they were very confident in their ability to read it out. And so the games get very exciting. And the Chinese players of this time, they also liked to play the most dangerous looking. They like to take it to the edge. So they like to play the most exciting possible move. And so you have all these positions that come up that look like they were contrived. They look like those positions you see in the classical selections of problems, just because the players are playing all out. They're playing the most dangerous sequences and they're reading them out. And so it's pretty amazing. It's very effective the way they're reading these out. So white plays here, look, and black is actually in trouble. It looks like he's in trouble because just the fact that white can save this stone, it means that the black group in the lower left here is going to be isolated. White has an even fight there. White's taking away some of black's territory. White does have a moyo on the lower side, so it's going well for white at this point. And so black plays here. So this is going to be the beginning of a whole sequence where black has found a way to capture white on the left side. So it's interesting. Black could have played below. Another variation that could be done is this one. And if white covers, then black can play here. This is probably leading into trouble for white. Like this one would be, black would be likely to win the race to capture on the left side. And white hasn't really gotten enough out of it. Or if white played here, black would be able to throw. Still on the whole, I think that white splitting black like this and sort of isolating this black group would be very effective. I think this would be a success for white. So in the game, black plays here, and white plays the strongest move again. And whatever black does, it seems that black is going to lose the race to capture. So like if black goes with something like this, it's going to be an easy loss. White just fills a liberty here, and already white's winning. So white wins that race to capture. Or if black does something like this, whatever white does. So let's just do it this way. Black's already losing. So that's pretty hopeless. Black's pretty much the only move. This is the game move here. It looks really weird, but it's the best move. It's actually equal to this move also. This is going to have the same result. Again, white cannot. This is the same because white can't push through here. If white pushes through there, this is going to be bad for white because black can cut here, and it's just bad. It's like if white plays here, black plays here. This is going to be a ladder. Whatever happens in the lower left corner, it's not going to be good enough for white. This is just going to be, even if white captures those black stones, it's not going to be good. And it looks sort of like a seki, actually. So this move, playing the attachment, it would be the same result, because in either case, it's going to turn into this sequence where black extends here. Another variation that could have been played was that white could have played here and allowed black. Black can't continue attacking here, but at some point black has to play here, and white would be able to take these stones. The two stones on the left, they're not completely dead yet, and so even this would be relatively good for white. But again, these players like to take it into the most exciting and Smiggle-like. It's like they're setting up problems for us to figure out. So they don't like these trades as much as they like the more exciting variations. It's very entertaining the way they play the game. So that's playing simply like that was not an option for white. I don't think he plays the strongest move. And so if it's a fight between this white group and this black group, which is what would happen if black cut here and tried to surround that white's group, it's just going to be an easy win for white. White probably even has time to do something on this side. So it's all these outside liberties that white has that are going to make this fight easy for white. So black has to try to capture these two stones. When black tries to capture these two stones, there's the fact that at any point white can play here or here to connect them. So black has to be aware of that and careful not to allow white to connect underneath with the monkey jump shape. Ikishin, yes, I did talk about him a little bit. He was an older player. He was probably in his 20s at this time when Huang Longshi was probably in his late teens, and so he was slightly older. And one of the players who was challenging to Huang Longshi. So Huang Longshi was just defeating just about everyone. But one of his rivals, you might say. And actually, Huang Longshi, the long part, L-O-N-G part, is a character that means dragon. And so, since in Chinese culture, the tiger is basically the opposite, or the arch enemy of the dragon, they called Zhou Donghou, they called him the tiger, while they called Huang Longshi the dragon. So they were two, you could say he was his arch rival. And they played a lot of exciting games. I chose this game, obviously, because it's going to turn into something very exciting. And so, to stop white, let's see. So yeah, so black has to play here to capture the two stones. I'm sorry, I didn't catch Morganol's question, so I'll leave that for the time being. And black is actually going to win this race to capture. So at this time, black has 5 liberties for this group. So it's these 5 liberties. Sorry about that. This one is not. Yeah, so these 5. White only has 3 liberties. So black's winning for the time being. And it probably looks really worrying for people when white jumps out here. There's actually a tournament named after Huang Longshi. There's a female professional tournament named after him, I think. I think it's a professional tournament. It's a world tournament, isn't it? And so at this point, if white plays here, white will have 5 liberties. So black will play here. And this is a win for black. Black is going to win by 1 liberty. So white bumps against. And this is where I say it looks just like it was like one of those problems in Kanzufu, which is in Chinese, I think that's Huanzhu or something like that. It's something that you might expect to see in a classical Chinese problem set. So black can actually capture these 3 stones. And so there's a combination of the cut at B12 and the hane at B15, which enable that. In some cases, like if black had a lot of liberties on the outside, black would be able to start from this side and then play an Atari here to cut white off. But in this case, it's going to be a win for white. White's going to have enough liberties, just even if white fills from this side, white would win the race to capture. So playing 1 and 3 first is going to extend white's liberties. In the game, black plays the hane first. So now if white connects here and black plays here, if white stubbornly tries to save everything, white will now only have 4 liberties. And white will have some ways to kind of create a crazy ko, like white could play a hane here or a hane here. There's a way for white to create a desperate ko here, but it's not going to be good for white. It's going to be really bad. So white cuts. So this was sort of forced. If black had a zillion ko threats, or at least an advantage of ko threats, black would be able to play a ko here. It's not very likely in a real game situation. It's such a huge ko for black to lose. Black has to play here, and black can capture. And black had 2 ways to do it, but cutting here, it's probably a bit vulgar. It probably loses more than it gains, because white has a pretty stable position in the corner. And arguably, white probably should have played this way anyway. In the game, white plays here, and black plays here. And so this is the situation you would see in a problem set where white has no way to fill the liberty there. White takes, black plays. You would expect black to capture the 3 stones. It's actually better for black to play here. This was another very sharp move. Getting an extra forcing move in there. If white answers here, which would be the good shape move, black can actually leave it again. So this would be sente for black. Black would be able to play something maybe here, something like this from the center. So black would be able to take the initiative in the center of the board, which obviously is going to be very important. So white connects here. So this exchange, before black had to capture the 3 stones, was a slight advantage for black. Kada was suggesting black do it again. This would be sort of interesting. And if white connects here, again, there's no point in connecting on the first line, but black would get some extra potential towards the corner. So this is something black maybe should have done, playing once more at 1. It's a very entertaining shape where black is forcing white into a clump of stones. But if white avoids that, then again, this is going to be sente for black. Black can play away at this point because white cannot push through at A13. So this would be, it's conceivable that black could have played this one. But in the game, black takes here, and white starts to attack in the center. So again, the way they have the stones pushing against each other like this, when in modern Go, a normal shape would be, I would expect white to be playing something like this. But they play this way. Again, it's just the style of the players. Objectively, it's probably not the best move, but it's a very subtle difference. It's not as if it's a huge loss that white is incurring by playing here when compared to this one. And so I think it's something I can allow for style. Okay, Kevin was asking me if I played Ichi Mahjong. I think that's just the Mahjong version, one of the versions in Japan. I know how to play, but I don't. Yeah. Okay, so white plays here. Back to the game. And so here what white is doing, for one thing, white is trying to reinforce this group. So if we look at the whole board position here, white, it looks like white's going to get some territory in this corner, maybe, probably. And white has this position on the lower side. So white is a bit ahead in making the territories, but white has this weak group in the center of the board. So white wants to reinforce this group. And also, if we look at this black group, you might think it's really strong because it's just captured three white stones. If white plays at this point, here, or it could be here, then black is actually a dead shape locally. So white's trying to force black to add a stone to that. White would like to force black to play this move, which is only about 3 points locally. White would like to force black to play that move. So that's also something that white is trying to do here. At this point, the game is going well for white. Just to remind you once more, white is the player in this game. In these ancient Chinese games, white is playing the first move, at least in this game set. And so white has an advantage. So like in a modern game, white would be giving black komi if white played the first move. And just connecting would allow white probably to do something like, white might actually pull back just to keep black's eyes. You can see white's building this stable group in the center of the board while putting some pressure on black. So black wants to heat up the fight a little bit. And he realizes that it's not going completely according to plan. He's in a difficult position here, and he's confusing the fight with this. So it's a slightly desperate maneuver, but since black can live at any point by playing at b7, he wants to get some profit out of it before he has to do that. So he's trying to, they say you play a kikasi when your opponent tries to play a kikasi. So you try to reverse that by playing a number of forcing moves before you're eventually forced to make a living shape. Okay, Leonardo de Wagner is saying, would it be necessary for white to play in the upper left corner to finish killing the black group, or can black make a second, no second either? The position in the upper left corner in this game position, there's still a C17 invasion, and stuff can happen, as we will see fairly soon. And as Kevin was saying, he's in trouble a little bit. Huang is in trouble in this position, and it's going to be interesting to see him turn it around, actually. So at this point, white can capture this black stone, but if white does that, it's going to allow black to connect with an efficient shape, with an Atari there. So black's trying to induce white to do that. White doesn't want to do that, so white starts playing on the outside. The whole sequence here, it's extremely, very, very dangerous sequence for both sides, but it also is very logical the way they're doing it. So it's very interesting. It's a very high-level game we have here. So white has captured 2 black stones on the outside in the ladder, and in return, the trade-off is that the upper left corner is now, it's a kind of a dangerous situation there. So black extends here. So there's a number of things that black is trying to do with this move. One of the things that black is trying to do is that at some point black hopes black extended once more. So we'll take it to this point. At some point, white is probably going to have to play here. If white plays this exchange, white does get to cut the cornerstones off with sente, but this gives the black group here a living shape. So once black has forced white to make that exchange, black doesn't have to worry so much about the cut here, because black is already alive on the left side. So if white plays this move at some point, black would now be able to make 2 eyes. So one of the goals with this stuff that black is doing in the corner is to force white to play this move. And actually, white now did play it. White does have to play it in order to have an advantage in the fight in the corner. White can't allow black to connect up there. And so black plays here. And so now white plays here. Locally, that black group in the corner doesn't have enough room to live. But white's not so strong on the outside either. So for the time being, white has to deal with that. And black is getting some forcing moves on the outside. And lo and behold, these stones are no longer a ladder. white still has to deal with the corner. So that whole sequence there was actually setting up this ladder breaking move, as well as giving black a living shape on the left side. So there's multiple reasons. Just going back to what I was saying about the opening at the beginning, where I was saying how these diagonal openings, where black is played in upper right and the lower left corner, and white is played in upper left and the lower right corner, they don't really link up to the games played in the 20th century, where we were playing a lot of parallel openings. So like stuff like the San and say, the Chinese opening, and stuff like that. And so that's why they were sort of not as mainstream as the ancient Japanese games, which were closer to the parallel openings. There was a continuity between that the opening theory that they had in ancient Japanese games to the modern times. But it's not. Maybe that's not so true nowadays, because we have computers that want us to play star points. They don't like the openings that we played in the early 20th century. I'm talking about the computers now. And so we're playing a lot of star points. People are jumping into the 3 points. We're starting to play completely new openings, and a lot more fighting because of that also. I would say that modern professional games are getting closer and closer to these ancient Chinese games, and they're becoming more relevant as that happens. And so black now has escaped the ladder. If black had been persistent in playing here, this would probably give white an opportunity to play this move. And so that would be really big. So it makes sense that black took this opportunity to play here. And white has pretty much, for the time being, white's finished off that black corner group. So by extending the liberties of white's group, it's going to make it relatively easy for white to kill the corner. So I would say white still has to worry a little bit about black playing at b19 at some point. But for the time being, moving out to the right in this direction and playing this point in the corner, at the very least, white can say that those two directions are neon. So white can get into one side or the other. So by curling at g18, white has pretty much settled that problem. And now black is switching to the center of the board. And we have to remember it's this group that black is trying to attack. So this white group, it's still weak. And white sort of has a flimsy connection here with a cutting point. So black is, by starting in the upper left corner, it all started with this move. And the stuff that black was doing in the center of the board, which was looking like it didn't actually work. Black has set up a position where black is actually counterattacking now. And it's getting pretty dangerous for white also. That white group in the center of the board, it looks like it has one eye at this point, so it's not alive yet. So already the game is getting very confusing. It's still looking good for white, but it's a much more involved, complicated fight. And so white's not going to stay on the defensive here, and white pushes through. So white is going to try to save these 3 stones. Just saving them in this direction would be completely pointless, because black would squeeze, and white's not really gaining anything there. It wouldn't be worth it. So white pushes through here. And I just love the way that you can hear the stones scraping against each other when they do this kind of fighting. And it's not as if they're just crazily fighting. There's actually some logic to the way they're playing. This is probably the only way for white to counter black's attack here. And white pushes through all the way. And we have to remember that white group in the center is not secure yet. So like, for instance, if white did something like this, and black did something like this in the center, this would be a dangerous variation for white. We have to remember that black is alive on the left side, so there was no extra value in cutting that group off, and white's not alive in the center. So that would be a dangerous variation for white. It looks dead to me. So instead, white connects up. Finally, black has forced white to play this move, which is what black was trying to do from the start. From when black attached here and cross-cut white, black was trying to create this position where white had to capture the one black stone. Because by doing so, black is going to be able to connect with Sente here. Okay, so now let's take another look at the position. This shape in the corner, for the time being, white still has some room to sort of edge out towards the right and can play at b19. So it's one of those two things. White could curl on the second line or play at b19. That's going to be, it looks like it's going to be okay. And I think white's going to take care of that almost immediately. But for the time being, it looks okay. So that white group is okay. This black group it's alive already because the point here, taking away this eye and making two eyes here, it's me eye. So that's going to be a forcing move white can play maybe sometime later in the game. And so this white group, it's connected up all around. It doesn't have two eyes yet. So we still have to be careful about that white group. This stone is sort of poking out, but it's not well connected to the rest of the group. So that's not really an exit for white. Black's going to play here right now. Let's add one more black stone. Black's going to play here, escaping with this group. So once black plays there, that group is okay for the time being. And the white group, it still has only the one eye in the center. White has to do something in this direction in order to settle that group still. So the attack on that white group is continuing here. And white still has an advantage in territory. So if we call this area a white territory, let's just get rid of that. Yeah. So if we call that white territory and white has a territory here, white still has an advantage in territory. Black has captured some white stones, only has about 10 points in territory. So it's not very much black territory. If we count the lower side as something like 20 points, and the upper left corner, it's going to cost a lot of moves for white. So let's say something like 10 points for the time being. That's still 30 points. So white has an advantage in territory. It all depends on black's attack here. And white plays here. Okay, so going down here, probably a slight mistake. White didn't have to play this immediately. Just because these games are very dangerous fighting games, there is a tendency for them to play a lot of forcing moves earlier than modern players would play them. So this is an example of white playing a forcing move, which was probably better left unplayed. And the reason for that is that it has a bad effect on the corner. So that's going to be something I'm going to talk about later in the game when it actually happens. But that extra black stone here, it's going to make a difference to the upper left corner. So maybe that was an exchange that white didn't want to play yet. In some cases, white will need it to make eyes on the right, but that's kind of an extreme case. So black plays there. You can see black is still putting some pressure on the white group. And if white plays something like this, obviously white can get an eye. But white doesn't want to do that. It's really very painful to do that kind of thing. So this would, if white played a submissive move like m18, a lot of white's advantage would just go away at this point. It's not that marked an advantage. So white tries to counterattack here. And black has to be careful. If black plays something on this side, white will be able to, and white does have to be careful of the cut here. But white could maybe sacrifice those two stones, or for at least white would play here. And if black pushes through here, then white can connect. This would capture black in the lower left corner. So that would kill that black group. Or if black captures here, this is painful already. So at this point, white would have the option of saving these two stones or sacrificing them by playing something on the outside and getting even more territory with something like this. So white would probably not allow black to connect up in the center like this because, as I was saying, there's a cutting tariff, so there's an advantage to cutting off your opponent's stones. So maybe a more exciting fight would happen on the outside. But it would be an option in modern Go, I think. So black plays an Atari here and pulls back. Black has handled that fairly well. And black is alive. So that black group in the lower left now, it has two eyes. So this has two eyes shape inside here. So that's good for black. Sort of poking into the white area, which was potentially territory. And white still has to deal with this group. And these two stones are not connected. So this did not actually work perfectly for white. But it's still okay on the whole. And white plays here. and is putting some pressure on these black stones. So these black stones, they only have one eye. It's really exciting to see how there's all these various groups they're all in trouble. So black cuts here. So that saves that group, and white plays here. So what white is thinking of doing maybe is that if black plays something else, maybe white is thinking of doing something like this, which would maybe it would capture those black stones in the center. There is a lot of potential, a lot of aji associated with those black stones. If black tries something like, for instance, something like this or something like this, it is conceivable that some of those black stones, for instance, maybe the 3 black stones on the outside, maybe they would escape. So there's some bad aji here. And so I wouldn't really be taking this course with white when black can actually capture white here. So there's a big sacrifice that white's making to capture black in the center. I'm not sure I would want to do that, but it is kind of a potential threat which black has to be aware of. So I can accept that black answered that. So black added a stone in the center, connecting up his groups, and white got the initiative in the upper right. And yes, Thumper, I think Thumper is saying it when he says that the players seem to be flirting with death. They're making use of their amazing ability to read out positions like this, which is a characteristic of these ancient Chinese players. So at this point, everything in the center is pretty much settled, and white's group here, it still has to settle itself. But for the time being, white is attacking black in the upper right corner, and this move at p17 is going to settle that white group. So white's going to fix that, and you might have noticed white has been playing a lot of stones towards the right side. White has this huge area on the right side, which white is going to try to build into a territory. So white still has a pretty good plan here. So this was forced. Black extends once, and white played here. Actually, Katago said that white should have played. This was probably better, putting a bit more pressure on the corner. It was a very subtle difference. This is obviously better than the knee-jerk reflex, you might say, to play here would be bad because it would allow black to have this forcing move. So that's why white didn't crawl. And black doesn't really have time to protect that group in the upper right, because white's moyo. So like if black played, let's say black played something like this and made a living shape here, then white would play here and get the territory on the right side. So this is something that black has to avoid. So black jumped in here. It's still looking like white has an advantage. White attacks here, black can break out into the center. So it's not as if black is in trouble here. And black peeps once and just leaves it. So this was black could have played on this side maybe. But yeah. He got 2 moves in the lower left corner, the lower right corner that is. Somehow I get the directions wrong sometimes. And this black group, it's a position where black is actually dead. Locally. Black's locally dead. But it's another position that doesn't work in actual play. So what I'm talking about here, just to quickly show you, if white plays like this, white can cut the black group off. If black plays here locally, it's a life and death position where you would think that black is dead. But black can actually get the connection at R19 and play here. This is a famous life and death problem. Of course, when it's a Tsimigo problem, the outside is sort of clean. We have a lot of white stones closing off all these dangerous points like this and this. So if it was like this, it would be a life and death problem, and white would be able to kill it. The way it works is white plays here. Sorry, let's use the stone tool. If white plays here, black can make 2 eyes by crushing it. So that didn't work. But if white plays, so yeah, white doesn't do that. But if white plays here first, then black has to cut here, and then white can push through. And in a life and death problem setup, black wouldn't have any potential towards the side. Already you can see this is not working for white. Or black could play here, and that would be a fun variation where if white connects here, it's going to be a ko. Or if it's a life and death problem, maybe white can connect like this and give black 6 stones and kill it with this. So again, it's not going to work in this real game situation. Black would actually escape just like this. So there is this potential dangerous thing that could be happening in the upper right corner, but white doesn't have a position where it's going to work yet. So white's going to leave it for now. And white plays back in the corner and pincers. So this is a huge move. Although there's a cut in the corner, then black would just extend here. This would be really bad for white. So it's important to play the side. If black cuts in the corner, black will get a big corner. But this works fairly well for white because white's going to take the side. And this would be a win for white. So black jumps in here. So at this point, the game still looks like white has chances to win. But let's look at the territory. There's close to 10 points here. This black stone is starting to show some signs of life. So there's that position there on the side. It's a bit volatile. So let's say white has close to 10 points there. In the center here, black actually has a lot of territory. Black has 5 points here. Black is going to capture these 2 stones with Sente later. So black has a total of about 18 points, I think it is. 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. 18 points, because I'm counting 2 for these points also because they're captured. So black has 18 points there. This is going to be 5 points, 23 points. And then some scraps elsewhere. So it's something like 23 points. This upper left corner, it's not really very much of a white territory, as we'll see later in the game. So white has a bit more than 10 points here. About 10 points here. Has a nice territory here. White still seems to be okay on the whole. A slight advantage in territory. It's not as marked as it was earlier in the game. White's advantage, that is. So now white is attacking black on the lower side and trying to make a living shape. And black played here once, and then played here. So this is where it gets exciting again. And maybe white should have avoided that by gaining a tempo and trying to connect up. So what I'm saying here is I'm talking about this move, which was the shape move, but it will allow black to bump against here at some point and take away white's eye. So for the time being, that L shape in the corner is not alive. So maybe white should have played here, which would be losing a lot of territory, but it would force black to add 1 stone there. Actually, black cannot play it for you. So black would play here, and white would be able to connect up on this side. So this would be a much more... In fact, black probably can't play this way, because this would probably kill black on the right side. So this would be a more forceful way for white to play, with the idea of connecting up in the center and giving trouble to that black group on the right. Or getting more profit, a living shape on the lower side, because this was not, it was not as active and it did not make a living shape. So that's going to be an issue later when black plays here. And white played here now, and white's trying to kill this black group. And white connects up on the second line, and black plays here. But it turns out this hanging connection, and let's just give white the peep first. This hanging connection is creating 2 threats at the same time. Okay, Leonardo de Wagner is asking, did Q8 allow black to live? Not really. It was, it's sort of borderline. But let's just take a look at that move once more. When black played here, this was trying to play some forcing moves towards white's group on the right. So, for instance, let's see. White could have answered it here. And then black can connect up to the center. So it's definitely that by playing that forcing move on the right, black is preparing to play something like 4 and connect up to the center. So you could say that it was a move that was a part of a sequence that's going to let black live. White could have handled this with something like this. And you might notice that white has a kind of a bamboo joint shape here. 2 forcing moves at the mark points. So white's going to be able to capture something with a sequence something like this. So if black captures that stone on the left, white does have A and B there. So if we assume something like this, black still has to deal with that group in the center. And hopefully for white's going to get back to this side at some point, because those white stones are in danger also. So it's still dangerous, but let's see. I think white would probably just protect. I would protect the territory. I'm not going to speak for these players who like to play the various dangerous variations, that is. Which would be, the more strong play would be to play here and then to play something like this to try to, maybe this would work. And black would eventually have to play here. Maybe this would be the strongest way for white to play. Saving everything. So this would be relatively a success for white. It's how white would handle it. But the question asked was, does black Q8 help the black group? And so this is my answer as to how it works. So white played on the top here and is trying to surround and kill the black group. Very aggressive. But as I was saying, this hanging connection here, it's creating two threats. So for instance, if white plays something, let's see, where did white play? White played on this side. If white had played, I don't know. If white plays this side, then black is threatening to cut here. And white's group on the right is in danger. White has to add a stone there. And black's going to capture these stones. So there's the cut at 2, and there's the cut at 6. And there's the threat against white's whole group on the right. And there's the idea that in some cases black will be able to play at this point here and make an eye there. So there's that threat also. And white connected, an attempt to connect up in the center, it's not connected up. So now black plays here. This whole sequence was not really very effective for white, but it's part of the process for making a living shape in the corner by making use of the forcing move here at Q1. So that's the idea behind that sacrifice that white played. And black cuts here. So this is a threat against white's group on the right. If black plays this point next, it's just going to be a direct win for black. So white protects that. And black plays here. So the only way for white to save the 4 stones here, if white was going to save these 4 stones, would be to push through. Okay. Well, in the game, white pushed through once here. So let's say start from here. White can save them by playing here. So white did not have the option of pushing through here because black would just capture. So white pushes through here. And if white plays here, white can save those, or at least white can connect up with those stones. Black will be able to squeeze this. And if we consider this to be a race to capture between this black group and this white group, it looks like white's going to have an advantage here. But actually, black can make 2 eyes. Black can play here, threatening to capture this white stone. And let's see, if white plays here and pulls back, which is probably the only choice white has, now black can play here and capture it. Capture 2 stones on the left, that is. So that would be, and there was a point in this game where a move here would have been forcing for white, but in this board position, it's no longer forcing because this white group in the lower right corner is about to die. So white can't use those potential forcing moves against the upper right at this point. And they're not really working when white has a dead shape on the right anyway. So that's how this move is working. It turns out that white can actually not save the 5 stones. So white connects here. Now this gives white a living shape in the corner with this forcing move. And now white is angry. So this is a point where S12. Rick is asking us S11, yes. S11, For the time being, it's working as a move to make a living shape for white. And it was putting a bit, there was no way that white could play to live there and take away that potential eye. So white didn't really have anything better than that. It was the most aggressive, the most active move. The other option would have been to play covering on the third line. But black would have had an eye on the second line anyway. So there was no way for white to take away that eye. Or the potential eye. So the whole sequence was working for black. I think white still would have had a few points lead if white had just sort of done something like this in the corner. And white has to defend these stones at some point. In order to maintain a lead, white has to play something like this. And this would defend these stones. Something like this maybe. So this looks like a win for white still. It's getting really close. So white was angry now and played this sequence. And again, it's not going to work. So this is the way they played it in the game. Black's going to live in the corner. And white actually lost a number of points in this area. So that wasn't so good for white. But if white connects here, let's have white connect once more. I just love these variations. Again, black is going to squeeze here first and play here. If white persists in trying to kill the black group, this black group actually has a lot of liberty. So black can play here and connect here. So yeah, white might push through once. But yeah, white's position is just falling apart. Black actually has a lot of liberties here, and then white's going to have to fill this point and then come from behind. And so black has 4 liberties on this side of the black group, and black's going to win the race to capture. Okay, so white connects here. This whole sequence was a slight gain for black. And white was upset. So white played on, well, I'm just guessing, obviously. But looks like white was upset because he probably shouldn't have played this Atari. It filled a liberty of these stones. So it looks like you might think there's nothing happening there. You're going to see something happen at the end of the game. Something pretty amazing. So filling this liberty was probably a bad idea. He just wanted to play something Sente before having to go back and defend against the snapback at this point, obviously. Yeah, so white had to defend there. White was just playing a final forcing move. He didn't want to fill that liberty. And black is alive in the corner. So white defended here. Slightly better for white to jump on the second line. So if white had played this exchange and played here on the second line, I think maybe white was still winning. It's sort of tricky when I'm used to the modern Japanese rules to be exactly sure of how this is going to turn out, and the ancient rules where it's similar to the modern Chinese rules, only there's a tariff for getting cut off also. So it's sort of complicated for me to calculate it, but I think white probably still had a slight lead. Black plays a hanging connection here. The difference here is that black's going to jump into white's territory. This hanging connection at L2 was actually a forcing move towards the corner. This was actually a chance for white to play this forcing move, which is setting up to make an eye by playing it T8. So maybe white should have played this exchange. In the game, white just lives here. A tricky move here. It doesn't really make much difference to the territory. It's probably a slight gain for black. But the idea is that if white plays here, black's going to have a forcing move here. And this is going to be an attack against the white group. I think. I think that's how black is going to do it. Yeah. So if white plays here, black can play here. And then can just squeeze. So yeah, that's how it works. So that would be dangerous. I mean, it would be devastating. Back to the game. So white had to capture that. White's territory in the corner is the same 5 points. But a slight difference in how they fill the liberties maybe. So it's probably a slight gain for black. Black plays here. captures, we're into the end game. And now finally, much earlier, a long time ago, I told you that this exchange was bad for white. In some cases it is. And it's because scrolling here has a big effect on the white group. So let's just to show you the game move, white took this one stone. White's heading to make a seki in the corner. So that was white's plan. This is actually it was pure luck. I didn't plan it this way, but in the last few days, two of the problems I put out at my YouTube channel were underneath the stones problems. So let's see, do I have, I don't have a link, but if you go to my channel and if you look, I'll give my channel link. I can give you that. That's something I have here. If you go to my channel and look for life and death, no. It's somewhere around 238 and 239. So it's either the life and death or the 239 was the Tetsuji actually, because it's the Tetsuji called in Japanese it's called Ishi no Shita. In English you would call it underneath the stones. It's where the final decisive move is played at a point where you originally had a stone on the board. So people get the idea that that stone came up from underneath the stone that was already there. What's this K19 that people? Oh yes, long time ago. Yeah. So the game move was, let's see, this one. But if white had played here, it would have been really interesting because what black is probably going to do is black's going to play like this, and black can make a seki out of it. Black can play here, and white will play like this, fill a liberty, and black will fill a liberty. This would be the seki variation, which is similar to what we had in the game. It's sort of similar to that. So this would be a seki variation with equal size of territory. So they both have an eye. This is going to be an equal territory in the Japanese rules where both sides would capture the one stone. In Chinese rules, I think actually white still has more territory because white has 2 points open and a stone there, and black has only one point open. So maybe it's a slight advantage for white. What happens if black plays here, trying to give white a false eye, would be more interesting. If white plays along and captures and then captures again, this is going to be a ko-like situation. So if so maybe something like this. This would be a one-step ko, where black can play at d15 next and play an Atari that white cannot connect against. So this would be a one-step approach move ko. Black does have ko threats in various parts of the board. So black has these huge ko threats like this one, this one, this one. Black has some ko threats here, and black has some ko threats against this white group on the right. Black has a huge advantage in ko threats actually. So white cannot afford to play this ko even though it's an approach move ko. But it turns out white can avoid the ko with no loss by sacrificing those stones at this point. So white's going to connect here, and if black captures those stones, you might notice that white's already taken, with the move number 5 in this variation, white's already taken 2 black stones. If black cuts here, black will have given up. This is going to be the Ishi no Shita, the underneath the stones situation. So I was really lucky that they happened to play it in this game, because when I put out those problems, I didn't realize that I was going to be doing this live. So white has captured 4 black stones and will have 2 points of territory there. Black only captured 6 white stones. So black hasn't actually gained anything. And in this variation, white's going to have an advantage in liberties. So an advantage in the race to capture. So it's actually better for black to ignore that potential Ishi no Shita. It's better for black not even to try to take away that eye and to go for the seki that I showed in this variation. So this would be similar to the game variation. So back to the game. Yeah. So white taking here, maybe it was a slight loss. And And black might have done slightly better here. This is a very subtle difference, though, so I'll not go into details. Black managed to make a seki out of it. And again, you can see white had, although this was an approach move ko, if white had filled a liberty, white doesn't want to fight that ko because black has ko threats all over the place. So black has a huge advantage in ko threats, and white is avoiding the ko variation. And black got a seki here. So that white territory disappeared, apart from the fact that white has captured one stone here. And in the Chinese rules, even the ancient rules, that's a point that sort of belongs to white. So it's sort of like a point of territory there also. Although it's not counted in the Japanese rules, the Chinese rules count it. So the endgame continues. This is a big move. It's maybe the biggest move in the board. And black cuts here. White has to be careful of this one. Again, we get into one of those, I forget what one it was, but this is, I think I probably made a Tetsuji problem with this Tetsuji where black can play here and play here with a threatened double Atari at f3. And so this would create a ko in the corner. Any ko is going to be bad news for white. White doesn't have enough ko threats to do anything like this. So it was correct for white to play from underneath. And nothing bad is happening. And finally this move. So the final challenge, and this was amazing. It's working. It's not as if he tricked white or anything. It's a move that's working. And white plays here. And actually, I had trouble getting Karago to see the next move for black. It didn't think it was working. I'm sure, it was just the computing power of my computer that was not good enough. But black can actually play here. This was the game move. So Huang Longshi found this move, or he probably had it prepared. It's an example of all of these things happening in the upper left corner, on the right side, the upper right corner, and this right side here. All of these little miniature life and death problems. It seems clear to me that the players had them worked out far before they actually played them. So it was something that they were ready to play. Especially, you can see black is making all these attacks in various parts of the board. They're all working. He had them ready. He was prepared to do them. It's an example of in a real game situation, it's an example of very exact, good reading. So to show how this move is working, we're going to start with white connecting here. In which case black plays here. White obviously plays here. It looks like nothing is happening, but black can play an Atari from what seems to be the wrong side. This is so wrong looking that it becomes a blind spot. Playing from this side and then here. White's going to get a seki. Black is going to get a seki here, which would be only a temporary seki because white's dead on the right. So this would be a dead shape. If white connects, black plays here. It still looks like white's going to win the semi, but white can't fill the liberties. Because ostenashi in Japanese is called also no pushing move. White can't push from either side. So again, amazing reading. Not only that he read it out in this final position, but I think he had it ready. It was prepared. And again, I would point out the fact that white did mess up here a little bit earlier by playing this exchange. So that was something that white obviously missed that move. I think just a lot of top professionals would miss that move. It's an amazing peep on the first line. It's not something that it's not a shape move that you would sort of expect to happen. That move and the combination with black playing an Atari from what seems to be the wrong side. That combination there is what is making this work. Otherwise, if white plays here, it looks like maybe white's going to be okay. White does want to stop black from cutting at t15. Let's look at the game variation first. White played here, just giving that to black. Black played here. Again, the ko is going to favor black, so white can't do anything about that. White L1 here, that's actually it's the biggest endgame move on the board, so it's important that white got to that, but black got to finish off the ko. So that was, again, it was a slight gain for black. So compared to this is the game variation. If we go back and say, what if white played here? The answer is that black is going to connect here anyway. And this exchange of these two stones is going to be a gain for black. So how that profits black is black's going to play an Atari from this side now. And throw in here. And throw in again. White only has one eye there on the third line. So white has to make a second eye here. White 9 is a pretty lame move. It's a fraction of a point. It's not even a 1 point move. And so black has already gained something there with the potential capture at T17. In this case, black has reduced white's territory as well as getting the potential capture at T17. And this becomes the biggest move on the board now. It's bigger than capturing that white stone at T17. And the fact that black gets to play at 10, this huge move at K1 in this variation, makes it's still a bad variation for white. So maybe the game variation was correct. An amazing move here on the first one. It would be hard to find. And so white gives that to black and gets to play the biggest move on the lower side. And the game is about to end. And the record goes up to this point and says, I think it says that white resigned. And so this is the ending position. And it's interesting. I find it interesting because if we count this board position with the Japanese rules, yes, it's such a crazy fight. The way they fill the board up with stones like this is the way that the strong players in China played, and it's why the classical Japanese players probably thought they were not very strong. But you can see the reading that is involved is amazing. And so I'd say that they were comparable to the Japanese professionals. And some players have called Huang Longshi, compared him to Hoinbo Dosaku. So he was an outstanding player. Very similar in the way he liked to give his opponents over-concentrated positions sometimes. And he was an outstanding player in his era. Also, he ended up giving handicaps to most of the top players of his time. So that's another way he was similar to Hoinbo Dosaku. So both of these players, I would say, Huang Longshi also was so strong that it's hard to say how strong he was. It's very hard to judge. But looking at this board position, when I counted it with the Japanese rules, you might remember that this point, when you have a seki, the Japanese say the whole seki is just 0 points. So they're not giving a point for white there. The Chinese count that as a point, basically because it's a point where white can legally place a stone. So this point at A14 would be a white point. It's very logical, I think, within the structure of the Chinese rules. And these 2 points, since they like to have the board filled up theoretically, they like to count every point on the board. They share those 2 points with black and white. They just imagine there's a black stone in one of them and a white stone in the other. So that's how the Chinese would count it. In the Japanese rules, when I counted it, black won by 2 points. In the Chinese rules, there's the fact that white is going to play the final liberty. Let's just finish the game for you. So I'm going to back up a little bit and make a variation. So that was the game move. So I'm going to make a variation. And it's just a few moves they have to play. Black gets to play this because it's threatening to capture white. And it ends like, so they've finished all the points now. And they're going to fill liberties. There is a question of whether black can play something like a move like this and fight the ko and get an extra dame. That's a thing that happens in Chinese games. It turns out in this board position, it doesn't look like black has enough ko threats to make that work. So we're going to count it like this, and they're going to just fill all the liberties. White's going to fill the final liberty. So it's going to be something like this. You can see there's some points where the players have to put stones inside their territories. But yeah, we'll leave it there. So this is a point where I counted it with the Japanese rules. Black won by 2 points. With the Chinese rules, white is going to play the final move. So we have to remember white played the first move in this game. White plays the final move. There's a slight gain that white has there. And there's the fact that there's a kind of it's a point, you might say, or a half stone that white gains there. Black wins by only 1/2 of a stone. So that's equivalent to 1 point in the Japanese rules. I mean the modern Chinese rules. And in the ancient Chinese rules, you have to count the number of groups. because you would imagine that they have to leave space for 2i. So for instance, if we imagine that we're filling up all the liberties, all the territory points, when white fills up, white would only be able to fill up to this point. This is the way I sort of imagine it. And white has to leave these 2 points, which are not counted as points that white can play. And so there's a kind of a 2-point penalty for having this group that is cut off from the rest of the white stones. So that's how I imagine the rule working. And because of that, we can say white has one group here, one group here, a group here. That's 4 groups. There's a group here. So white has 4 groups. This area actually it's a white group, but it's a black group also. So I'm going to count that even. And black has one group here, one group in this. Let's get rid of all this. So black has a group here, and black has a group in the center. Black has a group here. So black has 3 groups to white's 4 groups. Or if we count these two, it's 4 black groups to 5 white groups. It means that white has to pay the tariff for 1 extra group. So that would be a 2-point difference. And I think that's how they handled the Seki, although it's not documented as I know. So there was 1 extra white group. White had to pay a 2-point penalty. So I think in ancient China, if they had counted the game, it would have been 2.5 points instead of 2.5 stones, that is, for white. Or 1.5 stones. Actually, 1.5 stones. So something like that. It's sort of confusing to me because that's not the rule set that I'm used to playing with. And yes, Sev is that says he believes that Go Seigen called Huang Longshi a 13 dan. So that was Go Seigen, who is arguably the greatest player of the 20th century, and he came from China. So when he was young, he did study Huang Longshi's games, and he had a great respect for him. And he was comparing him to Hoinbo Dosaku, who is they call him the Go Saint in Japan, who is an outstanding Go player from about the same time of history, but in Japan. And so Go Seigen, people also called Hoinbo Dosaku a 13 dan. Some people called him a 13 dan. And so basically what Go Seigen was saying here with this quote that Sev gave us is that the 2 players were comparable and they were way ahead of all the other players of their time. And so that was my game. Actually, he played a lot of exciting games, but this game is sort of the most, I think it gives you a great idea of, let's just go back to the finishing game situation, which is, this was a variation I made. The game ended with this move, and they say white resigned. I would have liked to see a point score, because it's either 1.5 stones or 2.5 stones, depending on how they treat that Seki in the upper left, but I think I have it right when I say 1.5 stones. But it's interesting that it happened that whatever rule set you use, black is going to win. But it could have been different from that. It just happened to be that way. And the way he used these various Simigo-like situations in various parts of the board, like almost every part of the board was a life and death situation. It was amazing the way he read it out. So it was the most exciting game and the most characteristic, I think, of the strong players we had in the Chinese mainland, who played with this opening. Just to show you a quick shot of the opening again, who played this opening where they started with 2 stones diagonally placed in the 4 corners. This jump started the middle game. As I said before, it jump starts the middle game. It makes the strong players very strong fighters. So I think this whole game is sort of characteristic of that, the way they became strong fighters. The Japanese were playing relatively calm games. They had more different opening theory, and the games were more balanced and calm. And so this looked sort of, you might say, it didn't look very strong to some of the classic Japanese players, but I would argue that they were maybe equally strong in a different way, just different. So that's it for today. It's a game I really enjoyed. I might try to find some other games of ancient Chinese players that I will find There was some opening theory which is not really relevant to modern Go, but it's really interesting to me. So I might find something like that, where we have an opening that was popular at the time. So thanks to everyone for watching the stream, and sign up to my channel if you haven't already. At the top of the chat, I think I pinned up a link to my Patreon where you can go and find a tier that gives you teaching games each month. So that's something that if people want to get a teaching game with a professional, that's something you can look at. And next month, it's still January now. So yeah, next month I will be trying to make time for some various international tournaments that are coming up. So there's the LG Cup, I think it is, and the Nanshin Cup are coming up in February, and I won't be able to do all of them, but I'll try to do some of the games. So it's live coverage. So thanks, and goodbye for today.